something that we get asked about a lot is, we talk on the show and our processes, our thoughts to the draft structure. And that's why over the last month or so, we've done the zero RB content, kind of going back to the origin stories. But some of the stuff we talk about when we're doing it in every single draft and on each and every show, we may mention things like, for example, we're going to talk about today, the quarterback window or the QB window. And that can be to us, oh yeah, it's the QB window. But I have got a couple of questions over the last week or so about what is the QB window essentially. And it is one of the cornerstones of our approach to best ball and how to maximize those roster constructions and to try and build on your win rates. But for people who maybe are new to RotoViz Overtime, or just in general are new to best ball and are drafting and want to gain that edge, what is the quarterback window?
The QB window is where we're drafting our quarterbacks, specifically in best ball leagues, to maximize our win rates, right? So over a large period of time, and we have the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer, which will give you fan ball results going back to the 2015 time period. We have FFPC results going back to the 2017 time period. We have Underdog results for this past year. And you look at the different trends. And one of the things that you do see is that there will be some specific years where a different approach will work. And for example, in 2021, we did have some elite quarterbacks hit to such a level and in a range where the opportunity cost, even though significant, didn't completely offset that. But over a long period of time, and I believe even with the rise of the elite QB and the belief that we have in a lot of fantasy circles that the elite QB is in some ways here to stay with the pass rate over expectation of these very top quarterbacks. One of the things that you've always had is this trade-off between efficiency and volume. If you're destroying the opponent, then you're not going to have these huge passing numbers. One of the things that you see with Peyton Manning or Aaron Rodgers, you go back through and you look at some of their best seasons, and they were still a very effective quarterback and a quarterback that you wanted to have on your team, but the passing attempts were not up where you might have gotten from QBs who were far less effective. Those QBs had to throw a lot in the fourth quarter. You're trying to come back. And so you get a little bit of this balancing element. We may be moving away from that with some of the players like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes. Obviously, you have quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson and Kyler Murray who bring this elite rushing element. Jalen Hurts pushing himself into that category, perhaps Trey Lance, perhaps even someone like a Justin Fields. But even in that context, you can kind of think about, well, not all of those quarterbacks are going in the first 4 or 5 rounds. And the thing that you see is that if you wait until round 6 and maybe even preferably round 7 to select your quarterback, and then you take a second quarterback by the end of round 10 or round 11-ish. Now, that may be moving up. We talked in the MFL 10 of Death recap about the ways in which the current trends appear to be moving that window a little bit earlier. And so, if you can hit that QB2, round 9-ish maybe, then your win rate just goes through the roof. And people are very obsessed with some things that will help you win in week 17. And I think that you should be. I'm not in any way saying that that is not appropriate, but there are a lot of other things that are actually going to give you a much larger bump in terms of win rates if you're playing in obviously just what we might call a satellite league, a 12-person league where there's no tournament. And if your goal is to advance to the tournament portion of a tournament contest, then it's very important to build your team in a way that maximizes those chances. I mean, you can get some very big differences by following the lessons in the Best Ball Workshop. One thing that we're going to have coming out very soon, and maybe even be out as this podcast releases, is just an extraordinary article by Michael Dubner entitled The Best Ball Bible. Everybody will want to look for that. But again, here, the idea is that we're essentially looking for these quarterbacks that probably are going to come between, say, QB 6 and QB 16 to 18. So that's sort of your sweet spot for grabbing the QBs, the players who are not being drafted up into this range where maybe you really need to hit an elite wide receiver or even one of the big tight ends, depending on format, might still be available for you there. We know, again, the value of the elite tight end is just so extreme. But then you also want to get into that range before things really start to drop off. And you have QBs who maybe are expected to not have rushing upside and maybe are going to be low volume types of guys. I mean, Matt Ryan, who you and I actually have drafted in a few leagues recently, but at the very, very end, when he fell to like round 16, there you're looking at someone who's probably in a run-heavy offense and probably is not going to add rushing volume himself. So even when you talk about on a weekly basis, and maybe he has this game where you slide him into the lineup every once in a while, those sorts of quarterbacks are probably not giving you that potential to slot in, a 28, 29 point game. And then a second quarterback who, on any given week is going to give you a 28, 29, 35 point game. Those QBs are not helping the way that it might seem even in best ball. And one of the things that we talk about from time to time is that one of the reasons why the running back heavy and then wide receiver volume based approach to best ball didn't work the way people thought it was going to is that those wide receivers, even when you have a lot of them, they just don't contribute enough points, right? So you're kind of thinking, well, the spike weeks are going to come, and yet there aren't enough of them. The overall scoring is not there. And so when you're thinking about weekly scoring, one of the things that is helpful to do too is just look at total scoring. I mean, that's going to give you a sense of where those weekly ranges are likely to be on most players. And then you can kind of work back through and think again, what's someone like Matt Ryan going to give us? And yeah, there is this very possible scenario where he goes out and Michael Pittman smashes, Alec Pierce really develops very quickly. You get Paris Campbell coming back as the underneath threat and finally stays healthy. And then the running backs take some of these dump off passes and go, 60, 70 yards to the house. And suddenly then Matt Ryan is kind of back in business. So again, it's not to say that's impossible. We want to look at probabilities as we're thinking in terms of where does this QB window hit us? And then the other thing obviously is that once you start to go after these quarterbacks who, I don't say very likely, but are in real danger of losing their starting jobs, mixing a lot of those types of QBs into your build is going to be very ineffective big picture. Now, again, you and I selected some of those guys in a super flex because with a super flex, if you can wait on QB and you hit, it gives you just this massive, massive advantage. But when you're building out your best ball portfolio overall, you're really rowing upstream if you're not selecting QBs within the window.
Yeah, so when we're looking at it then over on the RotoViz website, if we use the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer and the positional heat maps, we're looking here, as you kind of hinted at there, one quarterback leagues. This is obviously going to be different in those Superflex formats, but it really is, well, I was going to say this. You mentioned how it could be changing. It was previously in the data from 2017 all the way to 2021, kind of the range between rounds 8 and rounds 12. But if we just look at 2020 to 2021, it's kind of moved from kind of round 7 to round 9. So it's a little bit more condensed than it would have been previously. Is that what you're kind of, when we're doing our builds and we're looking at the QB window in 2022, are we looking more at the expanded range, or are we looking more at that narrower 7 through 9? I think part of that is too, we talked about this, I believe it was with Michael Leone when he was on, looking at how the Russian quarterbacks have kind of been now sussed as how to be valued, and that moves them up, and then some of the non-passing quarterbacks kind of are sliding a little bit later.
Exactly. And one of the things that we're looking at here too, and we'll talk about a little bit on our Saturday show in terms of how do you make the value on your board fit with the value in an actual draft. But for me, these quarterbacks in the 6, 7, 8, 9 range, there are some dynamic players there. And so I'm trying to kind of hit the range that I think is inexpensive enough, though we're not giving up so much other positions. And so partly your own board is going to dictate that to you. Where do you think wide receiver is flat? And where do you think you need to get the quarterback done so you can sort of pivot to those 0 RB type of candidates at running back? That's going to push you in a certain direction. And then obviously where you think some of the upside is. If we have sort of young quarterbacks where, and we're not necessarily overemphasizing projections, but one of the things is when the projections show up very strongly in the same direction that you're thinking in terms of kind of contingency-based drafting or scenario-based drafting, we're like, I mean, if the medians are coming out here, and we can also see a scenario where the player plays well. I mean, you think of someone like a Trey Lance or a Justin Fields. What happens if they actually play well? Because that's not really what we're expecting, right? You look at that, and then the other thing too is that there are some hybrid QBs that slide into here. When Jalen Hurts slides into that range, then I mean, he becomes very, very compelling. Obviously, you're looking at Trey Lance there. You're looking at Justin Fields is really the last guy in the QB window. And by ADP, he tends to go after Cousins and Tua, but there's an argument for moving him ahead, or at the very least, to if you can get him late. And one of the things that Connor and I have been a little bit disappointed in the draft that we have ongoing over at Underdog is that we got very good prices on Joe Burrow and Trey Lance and teams that actually had some wide receivers that fit there, and also some week 17 correlation plays. So we were very excited about that. We took those guys. And then we also have Darnell Mooney and TJ Hawkinson, the Chicago Bears and the Detroit Lions playing week 17. And Justin Fields has dropped and dropped and dropped. And now we have a little bit of regret that we just didn't wait for him. So you have that play there. The problem with waiting for Justin Fields is if you miss, then you're sliding out of the window. So there are pros and cons of each approach. But the other element that we do like from these hybrid QBs is then the pressure is not as great to stack them with their wide receivers. They can come through in the big weeks for you with that rushing value. Yeah, I mean, if they're going to have like this 40-point game that breaks everything and really pushes you into the position where it's only teams with a Trey Lance or a Jalen Hurts or a Justin Fields, then probably, yeah, they hit plays to their big-time receivers as well. But taking off that pressure to stack some of those players allows you, again, to get good values in your leagues. One of the ways that you can quickly cannibalize any value from stacking is to reach for the players. And so from that perspective, those quarterbacks who were in the window also give you a little bit more of an advantage just in terms of flexibility with your build. So that's really kind of the way that I've been approaching it, because at this point, the prices on those quarterbacks are not prohibitive. Whether or not that continues throughout the entire offseason is uncertain. That's also one of the reasons why I'm targeting them now. So I think there's at least some risk that those players will rise, not guaranteed, but I do think likely.
And I mentioned using the tools over at the site. Obviously, what we're looking at there is the win rate above or below expectation. So based on if you take that player at that position. But Shawn, the other part, I guess, to mention is we're talking about the quarterback window. We've kind of talked about it in a number of ways so far today, but the key of that quarterback window is not just to get one quarterback, but to also try and get that second quarterback to optimize that build.
It is. And you can look in the Explorer there as you're talking. Look at the positional heat map tab. One of the cool things about the Best Ball Win Rate Explorer is it's really like 5 or 6 tools in one. But make sure you click on that tab, look in there. You can actually select specifically the QB2 version of it to see like where we want to draft our QB2. And if you take that player in the 8th or 9th round, perhaps a little bit lower if you have a QB at the end of the window that you like, but the win rate over expectation is very, very impressive.